Hello and welcome to the studios of SPNN for the St. Paul Forum. My name is Rachel Holbrick-Alwyn. There are a lot of efforts to build community in the midst of all these positive things happening. It's very discouraging when there is anti-Semitism or hate crimes or crimes of intolerance in our community. It destroys all of our efforts for building community. So tonight we want to talk about some of these issues and find positive solutions and provide some awareness and education in our community so we can overcome some of these issues. So I'd like to introduce our guests tonight. We have Rabbi Asher Zeilengold from Adath Israel Orthodox Synagogue in Highland Park in St. Paul. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Pleasure to be here.
And also the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, Stephen Silverfarb. And I really appreciate you coming this evening as well. Let's start out by just setting some historical perspective on anti-Semitism. When did these issues really begin, or what are the roots of anti-Semitism? I don't know, Stephen, if you want to start by giving us a little historical perspective.
Well, you'd have to go back a long, long way, of course, probably to after the time of Jesus. I mean, it's really when Judaism really is the kind of birth parent of Christianity, and the early Christians, in trying to build a religion, had to create some distance between them and Jews in order to create this religion. And over time, that distance has borne an animosity toward Jews in an attempt to subordinate and defeat Judaism and to uplift Christianity, in essence. So it's been around with us for centuries and centuries.
Okay, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about this wonderful community of St. Paul where we live, and yet some of those issues exist here today as well. I want to go back to last October when we had the unfortunate incident at your synagogue with the arson. And we're going to look at actually a news clip from Channel 5, courtesy of Channel 5, just to refresh our memories of that event. We'll come back in our studio then and discuss that with our guests.
In a couple of weeks. Today, we learned more about a suspicious fire at a St. Paul synagogue.
The fire at the Adath Israel Orthodox Synagogue was intentionally set. Eyewitness News reporter Bill Shirk talked with some people who are trying to sort it out.
Got a time frame. It's got to be up by sunset last Friday.
Out back of Rabbi Asher Zeilengold's home sits a small shelter.
And this was the time in the Holy Land, the time of the harvest, when people brought in their harvest.
It's called a sukkah. And the sukkah helps people of the Jewish faith celebrate their fall harvest holiday.
They could be very small, and they could be very large.
But the sukkah, a place of happiness, has brought Rabbi Zeilengold's congregation sadness.
I saw they found a gas cap, a cap of a gas can on this grass.
You see, over the weekend, someone burned the sukkah behind the rabbi's synagogue.
It has not been directly linked to an act of hate, but in my heart, I mean, I can't see that it should be anything else.
In Israel, it's a really wonderful holiday because it's like, you know, just sukkahs all over the place.
Andy Fine stopped by today just to see the damage.
All over.
We asked him about the fire.
Political, a prank, the Middle East, I don't know.
But Andy and the others say it just doesn't matter. This congregation will rebuild. In Highland Park, Bill Shirk, Eyewitness News.
Okay, and that was footage from last October when this happened. Rabbi Zeilengold, how did it feel to you as the rabbi at that synagogue when this event happened?
Well, first of all, we think of anti-Semitism as something which is very global, or perhaps hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, but here we felt it as something very personal, being touched by it, and we felt that it was an anti-Semitic act, because it was the sukkah, which is very holy to us, that was torched. And so something that we talk about and read about and know about suddenly became something very real and something very much part of our lives.
So what did you tell the people in your congregation when this happened?
The words that I used is that we should fight fire with fire, that the fire of arson, we should fight that with the fire of love and warmth, and we do feel that there's goodness in all people, and that very, very much came out in the aftermath of the fire, as I think we're going to be showing, and it did come out, and there's a lot of good feeling around, and that's what we wanted to stress. We wanted to stress, and this has really been the Jewish response to anti-Semitism throughout the generations, throughout all centuries. future is. And actually, anti-Semitism has been with us since the beginning of time, since when we became a nation. Actually, before we became a nation, when we were in Egypt and persecuted by the Egyptians. And the response has always been that we will not let it deter us, and we will always contribute to the country, to the city in which we are living, as Jewish people have always done, and we'll always move forward in the positive and the right direction.
Okay. Stephen, as the executive director at the Jewish Community Relations Council, what kind of issues do you see, specifically in our neighborhoods in St. Paul? I mean, do you see anti-Semitism as an issue in this city?
Well, I think we see anti-Semitism and racism as continuing issues that we have to face as a community in St. Paul, in the metro area, and really in the state. And actually, in the country, it's probably the biggest issue we face in the country today. It's something that continues to divide us. We see a stream of behavior. It ranges from what appears to be relatively innocuous leafleting. Of course, some of those leaflets that are spread about are horrible, threatening, and certainly offensive and insulting. And sometimes we see activity that runs all the way to arson at Rabbi Zeingold's synagogue. So it really does run the gamut. There have been parts of the country where anti-Semitic conduct has manifested itself in deadly behavior at the LA Jewish Community Center that resulted in shootings. So you never really know. The problem is when people have hate in their heart, will it take the form of leaflets or will it take the form of something more violent? You just don't know.
How widespread do you think it is? Let's talk specifically St. Paul. I mean, what kinds of specific issues are you seeing, or what kind of calls do you get?
We get mostly calls related to graffiti, vandalism, and leafleting. Fewer in the physical assault category or worse category. We have found that we've been taking an anti-Semitic audit of Minnesota and the Dakotas now for over 20 years, and we have found that anti-Semitic incidents on the whole have been leveling off in recent years. In St. Paul also, they seem to be leveling off. That's not to say it's not happening. Often the people who would call the JCRC are Jewish individuals who would see an anti-Semitic leaflet. That doesn't mean that there aren't hate groups who are leafleting in Hispanic neighborhoods or African American neighborhoods that we just don't know about. But I think the police and others it's reported to the police, so they're able to track it maybe.
Can you profile the kind of person who would commit a hate crime or exercise some kind of intolerance toward another group? What kind of people are doing this?
It runs the gamut.
Okay.
There are folks who feel themselves disenfranchised perhaps, or they're going through tough economic times and they need a scapegoat, they need somebody to blame. And Jews or people who are different are easy to blame. There are people who grew up with hate in their house and they don't know anything else. Many acts of, many hate crimes or acts of vandalism, for instance, are actually perpetrated by juveniles. Sometimes juveniles do it as pranks, but this is not like running toilet paper, toilet papering a teacher's house when you paint a swastika on the door of a Jewish person or an African American person. So it rises to a little different level, but frequently they are juveniles. And why do juveniles do it? For identity purposes. We had an individual kid who came to a Twin Cities area high school with Happy Birthday Hitler written on another form of Nazi paraphernalia. And he had, wound up with the wrong group of friends. He had found some things on the internet. It's so easy to get contact. If you're lonely at home, or maybe your parents aren't paying it much attention to you, or you're looking for identity, or you're an outcast in school, these are sometimes the trouble signs for somebody who might engage in that kind of conduct.
Do you think ignorance is a part of the equation when you're talking about hate crimes like this? I mean, do you think some people might be doing it because they just don't know better?
In case of the arson at the Rabbi Synagogue, and I would say it wasn't an act of ignorance.
Okay.
That was
it was intentional?
Yeah, to go around. I mean, if you know where the synagogue is situated, you'd have to go around. This was not just a mere prank or anything like that. It was classified certainly as arson for that reason. But we have found often that there are folks who haven't grown up with any people of color or any diversity without Jews, and either they go on stereotypes or go on what they've heard, etc. And education really is what's necessary. The human contact, and you see that people really are the same. Ultimately, it's the same flesh and blood and same hopes and aspirations, and there's really not that much difference.
Okay. Rabbi Zeilengold, do you have any stories from people that belong to your synagogue where they are rejected by other people or experience some kind of intolerance or hate crime directed toward them? Do you have any experiences
Well,
like
everybody
that?
has their own stories, and none of them are very, I mean, in terms of where they live, I suppose we all, from time to time, we hear people say something or mutter something that we would have to consider anti-Semitic. But we get a lot of people calling from as cars drive by on the Sabbath. We don't drive, we walk. And we do get calls from cars, very racial and anti-Semitic, unkind things being said, being called.
So people jeer as they drive by.
That's exactly correct. But in terms of work, we have not found that to any great degree in St. Paul.
Okay. When that does happen, what message can you give people? I mean, because that obviously has to hurt, and it obviously is a negative message. I'm wondering, especially in the case of young children and young people, it's like, how do you reach them to tell them that, you know, this isn't okay, and just because someone tells you that, you know, how do you reach young people to?
Well, we do our very best to bring a message of goodness and kindness and love and tolerance for all people. And again, a point I mentioned before is this is something that we have had to live with throughout all the generations, and we know that and we realize that. And unfortunately, in past generations where there were pogroms and there were crusades and Jews were driven out of their homes and beaten and physically tortured, and thank God we don't have that. And thank God we live in a country that is very, very kind to us and very good to us. We're kind to all people, good to all people. And we have every opportunity in the United States, so we are deeply and sincerely grateful for the opportunities we have. And we understand that there is intolerance, whether it's towards the Jewish people or towards Afro-American people or towards other races, and we do whatever we can to stress kindness and goodness and tolerance towards all people.
Okay. What is happening in the schools as far as education? You know, as far as education about the Holocaust, or as far as education about, you know, as far as how to treat one another. You know, now there's a lot of talk about separating church and state, and you can't talk about a lot of religious things in public schools. How do we address some of these issues in some of the schools? Do you encounter those issues at all?
We do, and we're very active with school systems and actually with other religious and ethnic and cultural groups, because we all really have the same mission at hand. Many of them are, you know, from Catholic groups and Lutheran groups, Episcopal and Evangelical, Pentecostal, as well as, you know, certainly the Hispanic American community, the African American community, the Hmong community. We all have this interest in common, and that is to get into the schools and to promote that kind of education. Now, you can teach in the schools is world religions. You can teach about religions without actually observing or practicing a religion.
Or advocating one over the other.
Or advocating one or the other. And of course, those are very important opportunities for kids who've grown up a certain way to get exposure to a different train of thought and different belief system, and do it in a respectful and tolerant manner. That's certainly one important mechanism, and something we've relied on very closely. We work very closely with a lot of other groups on coalitions for legislative advocacy, other social justice measures in order to break down those barriers. JCRC for many years has had a relationship with a group called Nechama, which is a Jewish disaster response, which really breaks down stereotypes that people have, actually in the Jewish community, of, you know, Jewish men not being able to work with power equipment, etc. So here you have 3 trailers full of tools that goes out and helps provide response, like Salvation Army and the Red Cross, in times of disaster. And that really breaks down. People here, you have people who need help, and you have folks who are showing up, not just Jews, but Lutherans and others, to provide help, breaking down those stereotypes. So really anything that brings people together, whether it's youth doing things together, and there are programs that bring Jewish youth and African American youth together. There's a program that we do with the, JCRC does with the 4-H called Youth Against Prejudice, that involves hundreds of kids across Minnesota in competitions and communication arts competition on tolerance-related issues. And it's these programs, bit by bit, that build up that kind of goodwill, that break down these barriers and provide for those educational opportunities.
Okay.
I'd just like to mention, before you made a point, asked me a question whether ignorance has anything to do with it. And last week, I was asked to visit a community in the Iron Range in Virginia, where there's a synagogue that hasn't been used for many years, and discussion was what they should do with it. They asked for my advice. And I suggested they should keep it as a synagogue and invite all the students from all the schools from that area, where Hibbing and the other towns around there, to visit the synagogue and to perhaps have a videotape playing there. They should see what a synagogue is. And I believe that would lend so much to their understanding, and also what the Jewish people have done in that particular area, the Iron Range, since the turn of the century. And I believe that would do so much that they should see and understand how much the Jewish people have always been part of every community, and what they have contributed to see a synagogue, to see it's part of the community, and how much it lends to everything that happens.
Do you think they're going to do that?
I'm hoping so. I'm working in that direction. I'm working for that.
Sounds like it would be a good idea.
I told them I would do what I can to help them.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to help me also.
Absolutely. No, that's the first I'm hearing of, and I think it's a fantastic idea to do. And what's important to note that this isn't a Jewish problem. It's an American problem. It's a community problem. Because if it's any of the isms, you know, if people say, well, there's maybe anti-Semitism, but there may not be racism. Where there's anti-Semitism, there's racism. Where there's racism, there's anti-Semitism. And if it's not something against African Americans or Jews, maybe it's against Hispanics. And if it's not that, then it's going to be based on income and where you live or what you wear. Things that divide Americans are going to be the source of conflict for Americans. So to the degree, that's not to say that we all become one, because, you know, some people say, well, diversity and all this diversity stuff, it becomes political correctness. That's not what it's about. Respect the differences. Differences exist. Christians and Jews do not believe the same things. It's okay. It's okay to respect that and to celebrate each community, inviting perhaps other communities to celebrate with it. And that way, we inculcate kids and adults with that kind of together feeling.
You mentioned political correctness. This day and age, that gets kind of difficult. I'm curious, is it really offensive to someone of the Jewish faith when someone says, you know, Merry Christmas, and there's Christmas gatherings at work, and there's all these things? How do you respond to that? Or what is the best way for us to be respectful of each other and our differences, and yet celebrate together?
It's our busiest time of the season. The winter holiday season is by far the biggest time of the season, because schools across Minnesota will have their winter holiday concerts. Sometimes they're not called winter holiday concerts, and there are limitations in the kind of music that can be played, and there are instances where, you know, there's not a lot of understanding about what is permissible and impermissible. And even when there is an understanding, there's almost a disbelief. I think most Jews, when faced with a question, is Santa Claus or Christmas tree religious symbols, would say, yes, they're religious symbols. But in fact, legally, under Supreme Court jurisprudence, they're not necessarily religious symbols. So you can have a Santa Claus and a Christmas tree, and it hasn't suddenly become a Christmas party. So some of it's in kind of the marketing and how discussions, I mean, if you call it a winter holiday party, then it ought to celebrate the different faiths. Don't call it a winter holiday party, you know, if it's not. You know, those are, but not many people I know are necessarily offended if somebody says Merry Christmas if they just didn't know. Now if somebody knowing I'm Jewish says Merry Christmas, you know, then obviously it's somebody who's kind of ignorant and just didn't know what to say. There's also this equation, I'll leave this in the rabbi specter of Hanukkah with Christmas. I mean, Hanukkah is not the holiday to Jews that Christmas is, or at least kind of ought to be from an observer's perspective, to Christians. Hanukkah is a wonderful holiday. It's a great holiday. Certainly my 4-year-old loves Hanukkah, and most kids do. But it's not the same thing. There's been an attempt, sometimes in the Jewish community also, to equate both of those holidays. These are tough issues, especially when you get down to, because people have Christmas traditions. They want to follow the Christmas traditions. They don't understand why it's not okay when only one kid in the whole school is Jewish, why this has to be a problem. It's not necessarily a problem of political correctness, but it's a problem that school administrators have to deal with, and certainly teachers have to deal with. And there was an incident in a high school around here where clearly impermissible songs were being sung. A student raised an objection. The teacher told the student basically to pound sand, for lack of a better term, and the student went to the principal, and ultimately the ACLU was going to be brought in, and the teacher removed the song. Initially told the student that if the student didn't like it, the student just would have to leave the stage in the middle of the performance. And how isolating and alienating, embarrassing would that be for the student? And then the teacher went on, after changing the song program, to let everybody in the school know that it was because of this child, this 10th or 11th grader, that this winter holiday concert program had been changed, which further caused problems for the student with the other students. These are difficult issues, and you take them case by case and try to educate as best you can.
Yeah, and you want to build community rather than segregate further.
Absolutely, which is why, you know, one of the things we've done is we have written to every single school in Minnesota and the Dakotas, and we've given them guidelines that really all the major faith groups agree on, what's permissible and not permissible with regard to religion in public schools and what we call the December dilemma, so that there be no questions. And we sit on the board of several school district, church, state, you know, religion and school committees in order to address some of these issues before they become issues, so people can be educated, because once it hits the confrontational stage, it can become adversarial. And of course, the kids, whether they're Jewish kids or Buddhist kids or Muslim kids, at the end of the day, they're still in that school. And we don't want to see them ostracized. We don't want to see them kind of isolated by their fellow classmates and their parents considered to be pariahs. So it does require a sensitive hand and good judgment. And really, most of the time, things are worked out.
Okay. I know you brought a few examples along tonight. They're on the coffee table here of some different materials. Do you want to explain some of the items you have here?
Well, the first is this is the BC cartoon from Sunday a couple weeks ago, the Easter Sunday, and that's the cartoon by Johnny Hart that got some notoriety, I think, in the Star Tribune. And you know, you mentioned offensive or otherwise insulting behavior, and this is a good example of something that's very controversial. Is it offensive? Is it not offensive? I defer wholly to Rabbi Zeilengel to give kind of the theological background to it, but I'll tell you, we got a lot of calls in our office about this.
For the people who haven't seen it, can you just give the message in a nutshell? Well,
in a nutshell, it has the last few words of Jesus, along with a menorah, which is a very important Jewish symbol, and one by one the menorah is being extinguished until it apparently turns into a cross, and the last words by Jesus are, it is finished. And certainly the implication is that Christianity has superseded Judaism, and Judaism has morphed into Christianity, and Christianity is the correct theology, and Judaism no longer has a reason to exist. That's certainly one viable interpretation of it.
So what are the ramifications of pieces like this and of the examples you've given? What does it do to the community in general, Jewish or non-Jewish? What does this do to the community, these kinds of things? I don't know if you both have a response to that.
Well, again, we feel that people should be taught that, coming back to what we were speaking about before, I would like to say that I'm very glad when I see Christians practicing Christianity. And the only thing is that certainly we don't want anyone to impose any religious feelings that they have upon us. And we don't expect any Christians to become Jewish. We don't ask for that. And what is needed is, I believe, a teaching and understanding that a tolerance and good feeling towards all people, and more education.
Okay.
That's what I'm in favor of.
You know, in this instance, that cartoon, I think, harkened back to centuries past very powerfully for people in the Jewish community, because Easter Sunday was a particularly violent day in centuries past, when Christian ministers would read homilies and basically blame Jews for the death of Christ and other things, and when the churches let out, there would usually be a pogrom, a form of rioting against the Jews. And this cartoon certainly harkens back to that. You know, Johnny Hart, who's the originator of this and drew the cartoon, is a deeply religious man. He actually believes himself to be Jewish, a Christian Jew. Now, I don't think that that's possible to be both a Christian and Jew. I mean, obviously one of the major tenets of Judaism is not Jesus Christ being the Messiah, but that we call the Messiah the Mashiach, and we hope the Mashiach will come. We pray for the Mashiach to come. But Jesus isn't the Mashiach. No offense, Jesus isn't the Mashiach, and it's okay, but you can't be both. And in one of his statements of explanations, he was giving tribute to both religions. And I'll tell you, you know, get 99 Jews out of 100 will tell you that there is nothing in that cartoon that is necessarily a tribute to Judaism. And that's, you know, the dispute also was about whether, in fact, the Star Tribune should have published this particular cartoon. We didn't feel he should, and I spoke to the editor of the Star Tribune, Tim McGuire, about that, and they went ahead and published it anyhow and had a debate about it, and it's probably a good debate.
Okay. Okay. We're almost running out of time here. I just want to show one more clip. This was a news story following the arson at the synagogue in Highland Park. This is a follow-up what happened a few days later, and hopefully we're going to be leaving this forum on a positive note about how we can continue to build community even though some of these acts still do occur.
ATF agents still don't know what started a fire at a St. Paul synagogue. On Saturday, the fire burned a ceremonial fall festival shelter, and tonight the congregation decided to rebuild. As Eyewitness News reporter Bill Shirk shows us, they got a little help.
We give thanks to God for the good that we have, and we pray for the future.
Maybe we want to put these two things together.
Sometimes neighbors do the darndest things.
It's going wonderful.
I am just pleased. I'm privileged to have been invited.
What's most significant is so much of the community is here.
Some of us come from as far as North Minneapolis.
3 days ago, part of this St. Paul synagogue burned. Firefighters call it arson.
Thought we were a little bit more enlightened, a little bit more tolerant.
So today, the entire neighborhood, everyone, helped rebuild bigger and definitely better.
We come out for each other regardless of what everybody's personal situations are. It's important that we stand by each other.
It's almost as if the walls went up and others came down.
Jews and Gentiles and black and white.
Jews, non-Jews, different stripes of Jews.
And that's wonderful. That's the way it should be.
We will fight fire with fire, the fire of destruction with a fire of warmth and enthusiasm and goodness.
Told you, neighbors do the darndest things. In St. Paul, Bill Shirk, Eyewitness News.
And we are told, all told, about 150 people showed up this afternoon.
Well, that's really a positive story, and I kind of wanted to end the forum on that note. Any response to that, Rabbi? After that experience, it was a horrible experience, and yet people came together. Do you believe the message is getting out there in the community? Do you see that maybe we're going to reach more people and it'll reduce the occurrence of these kinds of crimes?
Yes, I do feel that way, and this is perhaps a strange thing to say, but in a way it was perhaps worth it for us to go through the negative to have the positive, because we had a wonderful reaction from the wider community. They called and they offered, and it was wonderful. Okay. And that is a wonderful way to continue.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time. I want to thank you both for joining us, and I want to give the viewers a chance to see some phone numbers and some addresses. If you want any more information, you can contact the Jewish Community Relations Council at the above address and phone number. And we appreciate you watching the St. Paul Forum live in the studios of SPNN, and please give us a call if you're interested in any particular topics that you would like us to cover. I'm Rachel Holbrook-Alwyn. Thanks for watching.